Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for joining us. Well, mobile banking is on the rise, but first, guess what? November 8 is arriving soon. It's all about elections in the state of Pennsylvania. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, if you're tired of the campaigning, you're not alone, particularly for the U.S. Senate and governor's elections. Extremely important elections, however. They are nationally watched with reporters and others coming in the state in record numbers. Joining me to talk about the governor's election and the U.S. Senate election, John Micek, he's the editor-in-chief of Pennsylvania Capital Star, and Brad Bumsted, he's the bureau chief of the caucus. All right, Brad, let's start with you in the governor's election. Well, what about that comment I just made about, are we ready to get this thing over with a flood of commercials on TV and all of the...
No,
you love it. You love it.
No, it's hyping up. But the one thing that struck me that you said, it's true. You said a record number of outside media interest.
Yeah.
It's been enormous. I've never seen anything like the national newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, other papers writing about this race. And it's because of the two things. One is the Democrat, Josh Shapiro, has national stature and is viewed as a potential candidate for national office someday.
Try the presidency.
Yeah. Of course, he won't say anything like that now.
Oh,
no, you don't do that. But Doug Mastriano, embroiled in January 6th, extreme on a whole bunch of different positions, says, that if he's governor, he'll control the Secretary of the State and can decertify any voting machines. And this is a guy who has been a huge election denier. So that has a lot of people nervous, and that's where the interest comes from in this. But if you go back to the May primary, before it was absolutely clear that Doug Mastriano was going to win it, here's Josh Shapiro, and he does an ad for Mastriano. It was the only ad that Mastriano had during the primary.
I wonder why he did that.
Well, he wanted him to be the candidate, and it worked, and he got to be the candidate. And at the time, I was thinking, you got to be careful with that. You don't know what's going to happen. But it worked out, and he's got the candidate he wanted. He's been leading in the polls by 10. Now, one thing you might see is, from here on, it may tighten some. I'm not saying there's going to be a surge. I'm not saying Mastriano's going to win, but it could.
I think could tighten a bit.
And Mastriano has an ad up now too. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, Brad's exactly right. All contests now, he feels even legislatively, have been nationalized to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah, good point.
And you have the national party organizations coming in, and all of these outside super PACs coming in and spending outlandish amounts of money in the Senate race and the governor's race to influence the outcome. But yeah, there are broader storylines here. Mastriano is one of these candidates now. Running for governor, running for office, who's kind of taken the Trump baton and taken it that next furlong. And he's one of several figures running nationwide now who are part of that narrative. So you see that interest from national media organizations. You see that interest as well, Terry, from international media organizations. I got a call from somebody in Holland the other day who wanted to do a story about the U.S. Senate race. There's an intense interest in a way that we've not seen in a very long time, because I think overseas journalists are looking to the destabilization of American democracy. Overseas governments are looking at that, and they're looking on with great concern because it's that butterfly effect. What happens in D.C. ripples across the planet.
Yeah, that's a good point. The problem, you made a good point. Look, Mastriano's base of support comes from the most loyal of Donald J. Trump's support base. I think you would agree with that.
And it's substantial, and
it's expanding that base. Isn't that fundamentally the problem that he has?
It is, absolutely. He has that base, locked in, and it's enthusiastic for him, and he has enthusiastic supporters. You can't say that Shapiro's really are. He's got a lot of support, but it's not the same way, and it's really that. If you don't try to get suburban, independent voters, Philadelphia suburbs, soccer moms, the whole thing, it's hard to win, especially when you're the party that's 500,000 short of the Democratic voters. So you need it. You need every vote you can get. But it's hard to appeal to the Trump base and get the more moderate Republicans in the suburbs.
Yeah. All right, we're going to run to a break when we come back. You want to talk about national interest, Fetterman and Oz? I don't think we've ever had the kind of national interest in an election in Pennsylvania as we have with this one. Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, talk about an important election nationally. The Pennsylvania U.S. Senate race is one of the contests that could decide which party controls the United States Senate. John Micek, talk about outside interest in this state. It's going to be the most expensive Senate race in Pennsylvania history.
Yeah, just when you thought the last one was more expensive, Terry, along comes this one to be even more expensive. I mean, it's you can't turn on TV right now without seeing an ad for John Fetterman, the Democratic nominee, or more likely without seeing an ad from Republican interests, either from the nominee Mehmet Oz or his supporters attacking Fetterman for something. By my count, I've seen gun interests, I've seen Americans for Prosperity, you've seen Mitch McConnell's super PAC going after Fetterman, particularly on matters of health and also matters of criminal justice as well. Fetterman is the chairman of the State Board of Pardons. They've attacked him for being soft on crime. That has been one of the major driving storylines of this campaign. But we've talked about this before. This is a tremendous, and unlike other races, this is a very much a personality-driven campaign.
That's a great point.
I mean, I think if you talk to the average voter and ask them where Mehmet Oz stands on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they will scratch their heads. If you ask them where John Fetterman stands on, environmental policy, they will scratch their heads. But they will be able to tell you that they've seen advertisements for these two guys.
Yeah, the personalities are really quite dominant here, aren't they?
Well, they really are. I mean, they're characters in a way. I mean, Dr. Oz having had a TV show for years where he sold things on there, and of course Fetterman's portraying him as a quack, but and he's portraying Fetterman as somebody who's lied about his health and also with taxes has supported big tax increases but hasn't paid his own. So there's a lot of ammunition there that they're throwing back and forth at each other. And
I don't think we've ever had a candidate run for office who wears hoodies, baggy shorts, and has more tattoos than skin showing, John.
I mean,
he's comfortable with that, isn't he?
And that's part of the brand. It goes to that personality, it goes to the character about it. Tucker Carlson came at Fetterman a week or so ago, attacking him on the tattoos. Fetterman came back with a very thoughtful video, I thought, explaining what each of the tattoos means and why he got them. It's easy to sort of reduce them to these sort of shorthand caricatures, and I think, and to do that though does the race a real disservice, Terry, because obviously it downplays how hugely important Pennsylvania is in the national political scene. This is one of 4 or 5 seats that could determine the control of the Senate in the next Congress.
Yeah.
Debates are a big thing in this race, whether they have one or not. At this point, none is scheduled that I'm aware of. Oh, one.
October
But
25.
I said none because it's after people have started to vote.
Hundreds of thousands of people will have voted by mail, right?
Right. So there is that. Then, the issue is, Oz saying, well, Fetterman hasn't given a statement from his doctor to be candid about the stroke that he had 4 days before the primary election. Fetterman says he's fine. He does get some words mixed up, can't hear some things, but otherwise says he's capable to do the job. But Senator Pat Toomey, the guy who opened up this seat by retiring, says you can't do this job with the kind of limitations that Fetterman has.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt the 2 big issues that Oz has used has been health and crime. you know, on the pardons board, the pardons of people that Oz says people who shouldn't have been pardoned. And for Oz, he's had to overcome the carpetbagger, Dr. Hollywood, which it looks like he's done. And the Cook report now calls it a toss-up. It's, what, 3.7% on the Real Clear Politics average as we speak.
Yeah, Oz really closed a polling gap over the summer, went from about 10-ish points to 3.7. Now, that's mostly because Fetterman was not on the trail. He wasn't really doing anything, and that gave what you always want to do, gave your opponent time to define the candidate. They've now come back in a really vigorous way. Just this last week, Terry doing interviews with NBC News, doing a round of edit boards. You know, I don't know how much that'll move the needle, but you know, Fetterman is now out there and he's now campaigning again.
But it wasn't just that Fetterman wasn't campaigning. It was that the murder rate has skyrocketed in Philadelphia. It's big news there every day, and to hit on crime right now is, you know, a perfect storm for Oz.
Look, I want to thank you for coming in. All right, mobile banking is on the rise. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by CrossState Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, mobile banking is on the rise, and more. Joining me to talk about that is Christina Mihalik. She's the CrossState Credit Union Senior Vice President for Government Relations. That's a long title. And then Mike Wishnow, he's the Senior VP, CrossState Credit Union Association, a frequent guest on our program. Yep. All right, let's go to this mobile banking. But before I do, let me rephrase that and say there's some important consumer data that I know you want to talk about, so get to it.
Well, yeah, I think as a backdrop to how consumers are trending with their financial institutions, there's an environment right now, Terry, as you know, where folks have gotten a lot of stimulus money over the last couple of years. Folks have paid down some of their debt, but they're still relatively in debt. With inflation rising, people are very concerned about affording next week's groceries or what have you. Yeah. So as a backdrop, people are managing their finances perhaps a little closer than they had in the past. And of course, when we talk about that, one of the biggest trends is, you know, increases in mobile banking, increases in debit card use, increases in credit use, decreases in checks, decreases in cash. Yeah. So that's sort of the backdrop for all of these consumer trends.
That's a great point. Let's talk about mobile banking. First of all, what is it?
It's what you have in front of you, quite frankly. We are going into advancement in technologies. You know, it's providing convenience, faster transaction, better security, fraud prevention, and also keeps institutions competitive in a growing market. So
yeah, and I would add, it's what consumers are now demanding. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's not, the financial institutions aren't necessarily driving this as much as consumer demand, particularly the younger consumers.
Well, let's talk about the relationship between debit cards and mobile banking for a moment.
Sure. Debit cards are kind of, in a way, being replaced by mobile banking because it is more convenient. You're seeing more activity where it's gaining popularity across all segments of different income-based groups. You know, you can do anything from checking your balances to transferring funds. You can now do that without using an ATM or a debit card. So.
Yeah, there's also some important trends I know you want to talk about, mobile banking trends that will be a large factor, a huge factor in the next several years.
Sure, and I can go over them high level, and then we can talk about each of them individually. Okay. But when you're talking about mobile, people are moving from visiting a branch, using an ATM, as Christina said, and putting their financial information on their phone. It could be debit, it could be credit, it could be account information. And what we're going to see going forward is people using their phones much more than the cards in their wallet. And voice payments are gaining in popularity. You know, good old Siri. Hey Siri, pay my electric bill. You're going to see more of that. As Christina also mentioned, fraud detection's a lot easier because everything's being done electronically.
Electronically, yeah.
Right, and with big data, your financial institution or your card issuer understands how you're using your stuff much better.
I think also to add, to understand the consumer trends of that account holder as well. So your financial institution has a better idea of what you like, what you dislike, what type of transactions are common, and also an ability to protect your financial well-being as well.
Does that mean they can adjust their practices because they know what trends are moving forward?
Correct. Interesting thing, I'm going away next weekend for a wedding in Atlanta. And my financial institution, my credit union, sent me an email noting, we see you're going to be away. We have you covered. They have a neural network that monitors your transactions. So that if something looks way out of line, like you spent $1,000 on scuba gear in the Bahamas, and you've never been to the Bahamas before, they'll flag it and then say, we're freezing your account. This came through. Was it yours? And if it was, fine, they turn it back on. If it wasn't, it prevents the fraud.
Yeah, let's run to a break and we can pick up and talk a little bit more about fraud detection because that would be one of the huge advantages in mobile banking. Do I got that about right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to using a credit card?
Yeah.
All right, we'll be back. More subjects to cover after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, we're talking about mobile banking and other trends involving your money. Well, fraud detection will be more effective with mobile banking than with credit cards, correct?
Correct. Absolutely correct. So, in fact, according to Forbes magazine in 2022, we're expected to see fraud losses surpassing $12 billion. So it's very concerning, but with today's technologies, we have the ability to kind of nip it in the bud before it actually happens. And one way about that is big data. It enables financial institutions to improve their risk assessment, jump ahead of competition, and streamline customer experience and reducing that impact of fraud.
Yeah, and given the fact that, you know, we have 80 million millennials right now, and the way that younger voters more than older voters, I think, you know, utilize their phone for just about everything, it's going to be commonplace very shortly.
Oh, absolutely. It probably already is.
It already is.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. I mean, again, we talked earlier, it's the consumer demand that's driving most of these trends. Financial institutions that don't offer a full suite and that aren't innovating constantly and keeping up with the newest way of doing things are going to lose their customers or their members.
Yeah. So the point is, if you want to continue to thrive in this environment, you're going to have to go to this system.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about with cardless ATM withdrawals, which I think is another aspect of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, on my way here, I went to Dunkin' Donuts and paid with my phone. So it's pretty much the concept.
I understand.
So your mobile device is actually going to be replacing the ATM. There's two ways available to withdraw the money. It's the app generated, where you get a QR code for authentication, and a near field communication, which is pretty much what you do with your ATM, which is tap and pin, but it's tap with your phone, and that's where the payment is conducted. And it's beyond me sometimes, but it's happening.
I know. It's well beyond me.
Well, yeah, it's happening today, and what might be even slightly more scary for those of us that are not millennials is that at some point there's going to be retinal scanning. There's going to be voice recognition.
I'm sure that older folks will adapt to this too, but I'm just saying there are 80 million millennials who will get into this very quickly. That's
right, yeah. But I mean, you'll be able to look at a point of sale thing, and it's going to read your facial features and authenticate you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. That's another excellent point. So when you use a card, you don't know who's on the other end. You know, who's
Correct.
sticking it in the machine, right?
Exactly.
Correct.
Exactly.
Especially if it's contactless.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about another subject, and that's debt payoffs. When you say debt payoff, what do you mean?
Well, sure. I mean, I'll start.
Sure, go ahead.
Basically, consumer debt is coming down, but it's coming down slowly. A lot of these apps on the phone will perhaps allow you to round up, let's say. So you make a purchase for $1.40, the other 60 cents rounds up and pays on your credit card, pays on your debt balance. So there are mechanisms within the mobile banking world that make it easier for you to A, see what kind of debt you're in, and B, chip away at it in a very painless way for the consumer.
Yeah, good point. You want to add to that?
Yeah, no, kind of going back to the apps, you know, there's even debt management apps, not so much account services, let's say, where you can see your spending breakdown, you know, where you're tracking your debt, all in effort just to keep you aware of your spending activity and your payment activity. So it's more of a convenient factor of knowing where you are with your financial well-being.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line here is this is only going to enhance customer service for the provider.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to also put more information in the hands of the consumer, of the customer, the member, so that they can make better informed decisions about their own personal finance and what makes sense for them. You know, as Christina said, some of these money management tools, if you see that you're spending, you know, $80 a month on Starbucks, and you don't want to be spending $80 a month on Starbucks, this is going to point it out to you very quickly. And so you're going to be able to adapt your behavior to your own personal priorities.
So in other words, the credit union bank you're using will be able to get back to you, or you can sit down with the folks and have a better idea about your spending, what's right, not technically what's right and what's wrong with it, but what might be better for you in terms of your own financial interests.
Absolutely. Credit unions are there to guide all their members of how to be more savvy savers, how to, you know, decrease their debt, you name it. So
are financial institutions now sitting down with folks and talking with them about doing this and how to use it?
Yeah, most of our credit unions have the data available. And if the member wants to have some consultative interaction, most of them have the ability to do some sort of either counseling, coaching, directing, advising. So, yeah, absolutely. So you have the data.
Right.
And if you want the coaching, it's available through your credit union. I'm sure through your local bank,
this
too.
was a great update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, you stay well.